I would have had like a solid foundation,
Yeah.
or if I would have maybe like not been such an angry young adult teen, I could have avoided a lot of hurt and damage and self-infliction to myself and to others, really.
Sure. And to be fair to you, you know, this is not to, you know, to put all this blame on you. It's more just, especially to me from the mental health side, it's just trying to understand why maybe we made some of the choices that we made. Sometimes the environments and the conditions that we're in make it easy to not always do the right things. Do you remember, I know you said that happened when you're 8. Do you remember how long it took before you asked that question? Like how long maybe he had been gone before you're like, is Dad coming home?
So I had a phone conversation with him and he's like, I'm going to be there for your birthday. So he was meant to come a few weeks before my birthday and he didn't. And he goes, I'll be there for your birthday. I said, okay. And then I honestly can't remember how long after, but it wasn't too long after. I was like, where is he? And my mom sat me down and was like, I don't think he's coming back.
When's your birthday?
May 22nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that happened. You're waiting, hoping, don't hear anything. Mom sits you down, says, he's might not going to be back here anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how does that impact you, like moving forward?
Well, it was strange because I kind of like made the decision in that moment, like, well, I don't need him anyway. Like, if he doesn't want to be here, well, fine. I can do this on my own.
Yeah.
Because the relationship I had with my dad was really special. Like, I was a proper daddy's girl. Mm-hmm. We would do everything together. Like, we were inseparable.
Yeah.
He was my go-to guy. Like, if I had any issues at school, if I had any issues with friends, I would confide in him and like he would sort it out.
Yeah.
And so when he left, it was kind of like, shit. Like, I'm basically on my own. And so the dynamic at home obviously changed.
Sure.
Because mum had to start working a lot more. My brother's a lot older than me. He's 8 years older than me, but it's quite a significant gap when you're 8 years old. Yeah.
I would say at any age, you put 8 years, you know, that almost feels like another like generation almost.
No, definitely. So he was like at a different stage in life completely. And so it just meant mum was working a lot. So I had to live with my grandmother for a while. For about 5 years, I was living with her, maybe a little bit longer. And I just felt like I didn't really have my mum around because she was working so much. So at one point, I really, really despised her for it. I would blame her, and I would say stuff like, "Oh, you're choosing work over spending time with me," and she'll do stuff like buy me gifts or like take me on short holidays, and I'll be like, this doesn't make it okay.
Right.
I would literally as a 10, 11-year-old, I'd be like, this doesn't make it okay. Like, you can't buy me this necklace and think we're friends. Like, it was bad.
It's interesting you say that too, because I think, and I won't say for everybody, but I think there's times where, just to give an example, some people, choose to show love in that way, like providing gifts. But I also think, to your point about maybe mom recognizing that I can't physically be present as much, so maybe this is something that kind of makes her feel valued, in that it's not like I don't want to be around you, but given our circumstances, I have to do a lot to take care of us. But I hope that that I do love and appreciate you, so here's this, and then whatever she may have given you.
I think as adults, we kind of discover, especially once you start having romantic relationships, that we all have individual love languages.
Yes.
And if you don't know what your love language is, I would highly recommend that you check it out.
Very important.
And if you have a partner, start inquiring as to what their love language is.
Yes.
But something I've also discovered is that kids also have their love languages. Kids have a particular way, and as they grow, it might change.
Oh yeah.
As they go through different phases, they'll have particular ways of how they want to be shown love. So mine was definitely spending quality time.
That's my number one as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I definitely agree with you there.
Mine's more, now it's different. Now it's different, but back then it was definitely quality time. And so I wasn't getting that from like my two primary carers, which were mum and dad.
Yeah.
I got that from my abuelita.
Right.
So it was a different dynamic because I lived at home with Nan, and she has like, or she had, quite like bad paranoia. So I felt like I couldn't really like get away with stuff. Like I couldn't play outside with the other kids. I wasn't allowed. Like she lived in the absolute ghetto. Like I was not allowed out because like, it was not safe. So she would keep me like locked indoors.
Yeah.
I remember doing stuff like waking up at like 5:30 in the morning so that I could be at school for like 7:30. So I'd have like a whole hour to just like read or be with my friends, just to get away from the house. It was crazy. Yeah.
No, and it's interesting you talk about that. Like I can imagine, like we kind of talked about before, the generational gap when you're being raised by grandparents. Like they come up in different ways. Even the way our parents would treat us would be different, and the dynamic between, like you mentioned before, about how you and your mom were. Mom being a doctor, having to be maybe on these longer shifts and gone all the time, can leave a young person to have a lot of idle time. Not saying you did, but many get into some mischievous acts or being rebellious or, adventurous spirits.
Oh, I definitely did.
Okay. And then at the same time, though, then like you said, that putting that dynamic against grandma saying, yeah, I don't want you really doing any of those things. Like that must have been challenging trying to navigate that. Like, okay, I have some freedom sometimes and sometimes I don't. How did you, or did you find a way to like manage that successfully?
I would lie a lot. I would say like I'm at this after school club and I would be like out with friends until as late as I possibly could get away with. And then it got to an age where I was like 13, 14, discovering boys. And I was like, I need to go back home because I need some freedom, because I really like this getting home for like 4:30 p.m. does not work for me. Like it's unworkable right now, the life that I want to live.
Yeah.
So I told mom like I'm willing to work on our relationship if I can move back home. And so it worked for a bit. She was still doing like crazy shifts. Yeah. Coming home at like 8, 9. But it just meant I had a little bit more freedom to do as I pleased.
That's fair. And I mean, I know you had talked about this before as well. And I came from a similar environment with my dad being the main person that took care of me and my older sister. But my older sister was the one that tried to be kind of the steward and make sure that I was being responsible when my dad had to do those 12, 14, 15, 16-hour shifts. So there was some accountability, but also there was like a great sense of fear. So like I never want to get caught trying to do something, so you just don't try to do anything for a long time. So that wasn't as much of an issue because there was a healthy level of intimidation. But to your point though, when you have that level of freedom, it is very tempting, right? To maybe, and then we're young, so we're impulsive. Greater chance we're going to just maybe get in some stuff we got no business doing, but it's like, hey, nobody's telling me not to. So I can definitely appreciate that. And I think it's interesting in trying to conceptualize why it's so important, to your point in the beginning of this conversation, about having both of those parents being present, because it's easier to make sure somebody's being present. It's easier to make sure we have structure and the children are being cared for versus everybody having to be gone. Right. And it's kind of like, hey, be responsible and do what you're supposed to do at 12, 13, 14. Very, very unlikely that a young person's going to be like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I'm just going to do exactly what you told me, even though nobody's watching me for 8 or 9 hours a day. Do you think was any part of that happening for you?
I feel like by nature, I'm very adventurous and I love being out with people. And I have like a mischievous sort of flair to my way of being. That's always been there. I don't think that's the case for like all kids. I think some kids are like genuinely a lot more calmer. And,
sure.
But the fact that I found a way, excuse me, to create space and time for me to just get up to things that I wanted to get up with. Yeah. And they weren't always bad things.
Sure.
Sometimes I just wanted to hang out with the girls, or sometimes I just wanted to hang out in the park. you know?
Yeah, no, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it just kind of gives I always talk about like these good lived examples that we have sometimes. You know, we all have different life experiences and different family dynamics and circumstances, right? Some of us have mom in the house, some of us have dad in the house, some of us have neither, and we live with a guardian or another loved one. To me, the point and the essence of what we're talking about here is the value of making sure that we have those two people, even if they're not in the house, right? Just collaboratively working together to make sure that the family unit as a whole is very stable. And then, you know, again, so when we remove one of those people, when one of those people are not here, in your dad's case, it can be difficult on the children because, yeah, the freedom's awesome when we're young. But usually there's also greater risk of, you know, getting in trouble, doing things we're not supposed to be doing. And so I always just like to echo that point that even though I'm sure from your perspective, it was awesome to have that level of freedom, sometimes I found like in my time, like mentoring and working with young people, they get into situations that they otherwise would not have. If dad was there, if mom was there, if an older sibling was there as well to sort of help reinforce some of the rules, they probably wouldn't get, you know, caught up with like legal issues or drugs, maybe having relations with a young woman or a young man, very young age. And so
Sure.
I just think, you know, sometimes it can set us up for some situations we might not really be ready for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what you said has like resonates because, yeah, like I reflecting back, there was a lot of situations that I put myself in that if I would have had like a solid foundation, or if I would have maybe like not been such an angry young adult teen, I could have avoided a lot of hurt and damage and self-infliction to myself and to others, really.
Sure. And to be fair to you, you know, this is not to, you know, to put all this blame on you. It's more just, especially to me from the mental health side, it's just trying to understand why maybe we made some of the choices that we made. Sometimes the environments and the conditions that we're in make it easy to not always do the right things, right? It's like when you were mentioning earlier about your grandmother. Some of us come from like very hard environments, you know, like you might see, you know, like if you're living in poverty, you might see people, you know, just struggling to survive. So they may be engaging in illegal activities to try to make do, right? And if I'm growing up in that environment, well, then that stuff becomes very normal to me. I'm not looking at it like, oh, you're a terrible person because you sold drugs or because you prostituted yourself or because you were, you know, doing anything else that some people would deem illegal or unnecessary. That doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It's just, why do we do what we do? How do we get into these situations that we're in right now? That's what I think is the most important when it comes to understanding why that family dynamic is so important. I need to know why my environment shaped me into who I am, into why I see the world the way that I do. So you got to start by the family of origin. Who kicked this whole thing off for me? So I think it's important, like we always take that step back and really look at who raised me and who shaped me.